Hello there, BookTube. I am here today to review The Devil You Know by Mike Carey. Now this is an interesting one in that there are at least one, possibly two other novels that I know of that are also called The Devil You Know, making this quite a difficult one to find. So make sure that you are looking for Mike Carey. He is known as just M.A. Carey, I believe. But for this series specifically, he uses his full first name to keep it apart from his other books. This is the first in the Felix Castor series, which is a series that is quite dark. It's an urban fantasy, so those familiar with the likes of the Dresden Files, the Rivers of London, or possibly TV shows such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer will know what to expect. Even someone who's familiar with something like the Shadowhunters. Same concept. We're looking at a realistic depiction of the real world with fantasy added on. This is set in London, and it is. By the looks of it, I'm not sure if it is. It actually is. It looks as if the character itself may be owned by DC Comics, as Mike Carey is a comic writer for DC and wrote the Lucifer series as well as the Hellblazer series. That said, this might just be Mike Carey's personal passion project, because based on the back, whilst it mentions the DC Comics, it doesn't mention that DC own this. It doesn't say that they own this property. So I think this may just be Mike Carey's first. It says his fictional debut with Brilliant Thriller. So this may well be his first debut novel outside of comic writing. And frankly, for a comic writer, he has gone way above and beyond in order to transition into novel writing from comic writing, because comic writing is very, very different. So, what is this book? Well, I would go as far as to say this is less urban fantasy and crosses the line almost into urban horror. The Devil You Know is a disturbing and deeply harrowing book about an investigative exorcist, freelancer, who goes around London and tries to solve cases of the supernatural. Now, in this area, well, I'm going to have to explain some of the concepts, which is going to be a minor spoiler to the setup of the book, but I need to do this in order for you to understand how the setup works, and I feel that while I'm explaining this, it will reveal some of the early reveals in the first few chapters. It won't spoil the main thrust and purpose of the book. It will simply give you context for the review and allow you to decide whether or not you're interested. So, the concept is that we are in London. However, in this world, the dead have returned. Necromancy or some kind of life after death exists, and ghosts, zombies, things like that are all part of the conceit of the magic system of this book. They are all part of the same conceit, so when someone dies, their spirit can be brought back as a ghost. Additionally, they can have that ghost inhabit a dead body, and that gets you a zombie. They can attempt to have the spirit invade another living person, and that gets you possession. And finally, there is the spirit can possess an animal, and this is an interesting take on this. If they do possess an animal, they can change and morph the animal, which is what creates werewolves and were-like creatures in this world. It's a ghost that has inhabited an animal, and then the animal changes shape in order to accommodate a human spirit within the animal's shape, which makes it much, much more powerful than the sum of its parts. It's an interesting concept. We are following a freelance exorcist who goes into various different places where haunting is taking place and gets rid of the spirit, the ghost, whatever it is that's haunting the area, for a fee. As he's going about his investigations, in this book particularly, he encounters a spirit and then uncovers various different mysteries that he then moves to solve in a few different ways, getting himself embroiled in a more complex plot that he wasn't prepared for. It is very well written. Felix is very, very well established. You get a feel for him. You get a feel for his personality. You get a feel for his determination and his perspective in a lot of ways. It is interesting to watch the character move about the world and interact with people. It is told from a first-person perspective, which is something that this kind of book benefits from, because you want to focus on the main character specifically. That there are issues with first person, as I've described in the past. It means you can't do certain things. It means you can't have the main character be unconscious or asleep. You can't kill the main character because then the book ends. You can't have scenes take place outside of the main character's perspective. There are limitations to first-person narratives that I find often limit the stories. However, it allows you to have internal monologues and internal thought processes become a key part of the story. And for something like this, where you're investigating a crime, where you're looking in deep into an organisation or a crime syndicate or some kind of supernatural phenomenon, allowing the character to think openly and simply putting their thoughts on the page is a great means of expanding on the story without having to throw out a load of exposition. So this works well, and it is definitely the best choice first person. As for the tone gets dark. It gets very dark very quick. This is going to be disturbing, and as it gets further in, it gets more and more disturbing, to the point where this could be offensive and upsetting for a few people. If you find scenes of torture, sexual abuse, graphic murders, things like that, to be offensive or upsetting, you're going to find this book is too much for you. I would say this is certainly not appropriate for kids or teens. This is very much an adult novel and should be treated as such. However, if you can read past those issues and enjoy the writing for what it is, the story approaches these horrific subject matters with poise and respect. There is a lot of heart and emotion that goes into this book, and it makes it a very, very interesting read. I'll also say as well, this is one of the first books where I can describe the prose as something other than utilitarian. The prose in this book is particularly beautiful. While the subject matter is quite disturbing, the prose goes a step towards creating an atmosphere of solitude and isolationism. It gives a sense of emotional depth and resonance, and the use of language to describe some of the scenes, particularly one memorable scene where a character is going on this memory delve, where they use a certain technique to go through subconscious memories. The way those memories are described as they fly past that person's subconscious is so well written that I genuinely found myself stopping at the end of that chapter just to take it in and reflect on that, and then reread that chapter because I enjoyed the prose so much that I wanted to relive that scene. and appreciate it on a deeper level. That does not happen with many horror or fantasy books. This was particularly well written at times. So that gives you an idea as to what to expect. Now, it's not perfect. Few things are. The beginning of this book put me off a little. The beginning of the book kind of flounders a bit, and the first few chapters don't establish the main character or the world quite as well as I'd hoped. It takes a few chapters before you really get a grips of who people are and what their purpose is, and I do not understand why this opens on Felix giving a performance at a children's birthday party where they take pains to explain that he is sexually stimulating a rat. It is completely unnecessary and actively put me off the book. This is in the first chapter. It is bizarre and feels quite out of place. I don't know why this scene was put in. I get that they wanted to impress onto the audience that Felix was a down-and-out, struggling with money, that his profession wasn't respected, and that he needed to make ends meet. But at the same time, this could have been established in a multitude of different ways, and this one chapter, I think it may be 2 chapters at the beginning actually, was a deep distraction. It is a small, very small part of the book, and it accounts for what, maybe 3 or 4% of the overall text. But that opening really put me off. So I would say read past that opening. Get to the point where you're delving deeper into the character after the birthday party. Once you're beyond that scene, I feel that the rest of the book opens up and the characters become sympathetic and interesting and very, very deep and realised. That one scene, as an opening scene, I feel is the worst in the book and is potentially the one point that drags the whole book down. I would almost have wanted that initial scene to be completely scrubbed and simply a paragraph or 2 explaining that he was coming back from a birthday party where he was performing as basically a stage magician, and that he was doing this to make ends meet, and a couple of lines to describe his feelings on it. That would have been all we needed. We could have skipped straight to him on his way home, and the story would not have suffered at all for it. So, yeah. Other than that one scene, I feel that this is a particularly well-written, well-realised book. It is harrowing, it is disturbing, it is thrilling. The pacing is a little slower at times and allows you to get a feel for the atmosphere, the dreariness, and the pain and fear that Felix feels as he delves into the mystery that he's solving. There are a few scenes of action that are well realised and that are well established. The writing helps to make them fit the tone without making them too action-packed, because this isn't an action book. One of the things that I do like, something I've not mentioned, which is one of the main parts of the story, is how the magic is handled. The exorcisms are done using music, which is an intriguing conceit. What we have is Felix is able to play a tin flute, almost like a penny whistle. And he can play this in such a way that he develops a melody, and that melody entangles the soul of a ghost, a person, an undead creature, and then if he can entangle it completely in the melody of the music, when the music stops, it destroys the soul. That is a really interesting way of making his magic into something that is skill-based, that is something intricate, without it being fighting. That is fantastic, and as a concept, it is interesting. It also gives a moral dilemma, because it doesn't describe whether or not he's sending the soul onto an afterlife, whether he's destroying the soul, whether he's damning the soul, whether the soul is indeed a soul or just some kind of supernatural imprint of a person. So if, say, you're haunted by the death of your child and your 6-year-old child is haunting your home, do you hire the exorcist to get rid of the ghost of your 6-year-old? Because maybe that's not really their ghost. Maybe it's just a magical echo of your child, at which point it's not your child, you can just destroy it. And maybe it is your child, and by hiring an exorcist, you are now damning the child's soul, or destroying it completely so they never get this afterlife. Maybe there is no afterlife. Maybe this is the only way you continue, and regardless of how you deal with the soul, it will be destroyed, and there is nothing beyond that. There's either life, this lingering afterlife, and then the abyss of nothing. It's not clearly described, but characters in the book, they do have very clear perspectives, and they're different. This is a contentious point of opinion for many characters throughout it, and they do have moral justifications, they do have philosophical and even religious justifications for how they feel and their perspective on this. Some of them believe very different things, and the moral justification for an exorcist's job is one of the themes that is explored without describing directly what the soul is. And this makes this book one that really, really resonates to anyone who has contemplated the nature of the afterlife, religion, and the concept of what happens after we die. Whether you're religious or not, I think this is going to be something that is going to dig deep and mean quite a bit to a lot of people. I myself am a lifelong atheist. I have never been religious, and I have contemplated the concept of life after death. I do not believe in a soul or any intrinsic life after death. I believe that life ends, and that's it. Whether you believe the same or not doesn't matter. What does matter is, if you care or have considered this, this is going to make those thoughts bubble back up to the surface. It's going to play with those concepts a little, and if you're deeply religious and believe in an afterlife, a heaven, some kind of religious karmic system or karmic balance, then this is going to play with that, because you're going to have a different outlook to someone who doesn't believe in any of it. But at the same point, it never takes a side. So I suspect that even a deeply religious person is going to see this as an interesting and captivating moral question. Whether you come down on a different side to me is all a matter of perspective and our subjective values. But I do feel that it is one of the best themes within the book, and it is one of the things that will grab you and draw you into the story. It will give you a sense of philosophical fulfillment when you read it. So all that said, where do I place this book? Honestly, I wanted to make this a 5-star. And if it wasn't for that opening, I probably would just put a 5-star on this. That opening is the only thing about it I find distressing. And I think that I'm going to, regardless of the flaws I see with that, I'm going to make this my first 5-star. This is my first 5-star read. I adored this book. This was a joy to read. It was harrowing, it was upsetting, it was revealing, it made me think about concepts that I have deeply considered, and it stuck with me. I read this a year ago, and I have not flicked through to remind myself of anything. I remember the characters, I remember the plot, I remember scenes in excruciating detail. This book has stuck with me, and it will stick with me for a long time. I have the sequel, and I'm going to read it, and I will not need to reread this to refresh my memory. I know deeply what's happened in this book. That is the sign of a good book. I will still remember this clearly in a decade. So that beginning open, if that could be cut, this book would be an all-time classic for me. I hope that those of you who like horror, urban fantasy, and can stomach the darker parts of the story will find an intriguing, interesting mystery and horror fantasy hybrid within the pages of this book. I hope that those of you who are intrigued by what I've said, go find this book. Read it. It is a fantastic read. It is not for the faint-hearted, but if you can stomach the harsher elements and want to explore the more personal elements of the story, you will get quite a lot out of this. I highly, highly recommend it. Now, what about length? This is something that I like to go into. I like to make sure that people are aware of what they're getting themselves into. So, this is the mass market paperback that I'm holding here. It is 513 pages, and we are looking at an average of 10 words per line. And 32 lines per page. So we're looking at around 320 if it was a full block text on each page, if I've got that right. Yes, I have. 31 lines with around 10. So we're looking at about 310 to 320. There are some breaks with dialogue, but not a great deal. It is very descriptive, so we can probably say that this is going to be around 280 words per page, possibly a little more. With the page count here, we're looking at around, I would say around 600 minutes worth of reading for the average person with their average reading speed, so 10 hours. 10 hours of reading. You can probably get it done in about 8 if you wanted to rush through it. If you want to take it slow, especially with some of the more visceral scenes, you could push this to 12 to 15 hours if you take it slow, take a few breaks. And I would suspect that for a few people, you're going to slow down reading this because of the nature of some of the scenes. It's not something you can speed your way through. So you're looking at probably about a 10-hour read, an easy week's worth of reading for most people. Not an excessive commitment, well worth a try, I would say. The mass market, like I say, is a little over 500 pages. I suspect if you got the hardback or the trade paperback, it's going to be probably around 400 pages or so, because mass markets tend to have more pages as they're smaller books. I do not recommend the mass market paperback. The mass market paperback is terrible in quality. Whilst the cover is really nice, I really love the cover, the margins are hugely inconsistent. As you can see here, the margins are massively inconsistent, and sometimes they print almost right to the end of the page. Sometimes there's about an inch worth of space. Sometimes the words go almost to the bottom of the page, where there's almost no space at all. Sometimes there's a huge margin. It is really, really inconsistent. It's as if no one really cared when they were trying to put this book into print. A good example here is page 60. It's right up to the edge, right there, but if we go just to page 86, look how huge the margin is by comparison here. This book is very cheaply put together. That is just this edition. I don't know how prevalent it is, how likely it is that that's the one you're going to read, but it's something I wanted to bring up because it was a distraction when I was reading it. I've got beyond that, and I was able to enjoy the book for what it was, but I would seek out a better quality edition if you can. Though, admittedly, the front cover This is such a better cover than the cover of the trade paperback, which is way more colourful and not at all indicative of the contents. This actually gets the tone of the book down perfectly. That's how this book should be advertised. So this cover is fantastic. Anyway, that's all I have to say on The Devil You Know. Hopefully this was entertaining and informative, and if you give the book a try, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you get out of it as much as I got from it. Till then, next time, I'll see you later. Bye.